Good morning, it's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony up on the hill. It is Sunday, June 29th. So we're going to do the astrology of today through the end of the week, which will be July 5th on Saturday, believe it or not. So this will take us through the 4th of July holiday in the US. Very foggy day up here. It's just another June gloom morning in Southern California. It will break apart here in a couple hours, but it is just after 7 a.m. here. So it's still pretty foggy. By about 9, usually clears up. Anyway, so we got some things going on this week. Last week we had the big new moon in Cancer conjuncting Jupiter, squaring the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, which is again setting the stage for the next 6 to 8 months. So that's not just an isolated energetic situation. That's a foundational ripple essentially for the next 6 to 8 months. This week we got a few things going on. One that is kind of echoing the themes of that new moon from last week, and then another that is previewing the new moon that we'll have later in July, so on July 24th, so almost 4 weeks from now. But it's worth mentioning just because of what's happening right now. So as of right now, this weekend, you might have noticed, we had Mercury in Leo. Early degrees of Leo just entered Leo, I think, on Thursday. Friday, Saturday, the last couple days, it formed a trine to both Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So highlighting that Saturn-Neptune-Aries conjunction that the new moon last week ignited essentially with that square. Okay. And then early this morning, Mercury opposed Pluto in Aquarius. So Mercury in early degrees of Leo is kind of bridging the gap, bridging a sextile essentially between Pluto retrograde in Aquarius and that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, because that for most of the rest of July into August will be in play. There'll be a 1-degree orb between retrograde Pluto in Aquarius and that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. And so Mercury is kind of introducing that, okay, this weekend. And we might have noticed with Mercury in Leo, Leo is very confident, bold, prideful, essentially. In Mercury making that trine to Saturn and Neptune and Aries, we might have felt kind of expansive when it comes to our position in the world, our place in the world, kind of having a more sense of confidence that, hey, even in my uniqueness, here is my role I can play. Kind of playing off in our mental realm, not so much start in the mental realm. So that makes sense. We got to start somewhere, right? And so we're stimulating that mental pattern, which again will come into play when the sun in the new moon, essentially in late July, is going to stimulate that same degree, about 2 degrees Leo or so, forming that trine to Saturn and Neptune in Aries and opposing Pluto in Aquarius, just like Mercury's doing this weekend. And with that opposition to Pluto in Aquarius, so coming off of that expansiveness and that sense of confidence in, where our unique place can be, there can be a sense of coming up against the edges, coming up against the walls, right? Pluto is kind of saying, hey, you're not allowed past there, right? And that can bring up frustration. So anything from our past that has put us in a position to view ourselves as small is being challenged this weekend. And again, that's a preview for the new moon later in July, where we'll be able to take something with that and grow from that. Okay, but there could be some frustration this weekend, some sense that like, oh, here's where I can fit, and then, oh, wait, why is the world not allowing me to fit? Okay, so there can be some territorial sensations, memories, things like that coming up. So it's important just to channel that correctly, because on a mental level, where things are coming up from the past, okay? That's, Pluto retrograde in Aquarius. And the reason for it is to clear that path for the future. Okay, so it's not to dwell in it, to go back in our past, go back on past patterns, but to have things come up that would otherwise trigger past patterns so that we can deal with them differently from here forward. Okay, so any sense of frustration to that expansiveness, know that that's okay right now, and that we'll have more answers and solutions for that by the end of the month. And later tonight, Sunday night, June 29th, Mercury's actually entering the shadow zone for its upcoming retrograde. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, roughly, for about 3 weeks or so, and we're due for another one. So Mercury's going to enter 4 degrees Leo tonight, and then that zone from 4 degrees to 15 degrees Leo is where the retrograde is going to occur in this retrograde. Okay, so it won't turn retrograde at 15 degrees Leo until July 17th, about a week before that new moon in Leo. But right now it's entering that shadow zone. So it's entering the degree where Mercury will back into and turn direct in August. That'll be August 11th. So the period from July 17th to August 11th will be the retrograde from 15 degrees Leo back to 4 degrees Leo with the planet Mercury. Okay, but it enters 4 degrees Leo here tonight. So we're going to start that phase. And it's interesting that this weekend is kind of igniting that perception of our expansiveness, as well as the restrictions to the expansiveness. Because that's what we're going to work through in this Mercury retrograde. This sense of, knowingness about what we have to offer, how we can express ourselves, what is our unique expression, and then having to deal with where our perceived boundaries are. And did we set those boundaries? Did someone else set those boundaries and prevent us from fully expanding? And so the Mercury retrograde period, along with that new moon later in the month, is going to be setting up that energetic situation where we can explore that, deal with that, and then learn how to expand those boundaries. So whether we set them, someone else set them, we'll learn how to expand them so that we don't feel that restriction that we're feeling this weekend on that mental level. Okay, so keep that in mind. Lots of review that will be happening over the next several weeks with regards to our confidence, our expansiveness, our expression. Okay. Then as we get toward the end of this week, late Wednesday through Thursday, we're going to have another one of those extended void of course moons. Okay, we had one last week. We're actually going to have one, I think, next week as well. So this is because a lot of the outer planets are in early degrees of signs. They're just, they just changed signs. And so the last aspect that the moon is making, in some cases, in these recent, over the summer, essentially, can be with planets early in degrees. And so can be hours and hours of no aspects between the moon, or no major aspects between the moon and other planets before there's a change of signs. So in this case, about midday on Wednesday, the moon in Libra will be squaring the sun in Cancer. So this is the waxing square coming off of last week's new moon in Cancer. And so it opens up about a 36-hour, maybe, I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but again, a pretty extensive void of course moon. A time where it's going to be harder to focus our energies, harder to organize ourselves and move forward with things. So better for introspection. Okay, but this being the waxing square, it's actually a square to the sun in Cancer. It's taking last week's new moon again, which is setting us up for the next 6 to 8 months, and it's forcing us to open up to it and kind of integrate some things about that and to introspect on that, because it's such an important new moon that it's not just a fleeting moment, that it is taking us into the rest of 2025 and into early 2026. So it'll be important to ruminate on what last week's new moon did for us, or meant for us, or what it's opening for us. And this would be a great time, Wednesday, Thursday, to introspect on that. Okay, and then by the time we get to late Thursday into Friday, this is when Venus in Taurus is going to hit 29 degrees Taurus and join Uranus at 29 degrees Taurus before it enters Gemini. And it's also kind of joining hands with Uranus in a way and pulling it over the threshold from Taurus into Gemini. Because next week on July 7th, which is going to be, I think, Monday of next week, so 8 days from now, that will be when Uranus enters Gemini for the first time since the 1940s. So again, another outer planet changing signs. We just had, we had Neptune, we had Pluto changing signs. We also even had Saturn and Jupiter changing signs in recent times. So anything in the mid to outer range of planets, everything's changing signs in 2025, okay? So Uranus is going to enter Gemini next week, but before it does, Venus joins Uranus at the last degree of Taurus. Kind of like this last moment, like, hey, we're about to make this leap. Are we ready for that? Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018. It's challenged us when it comes to security, when it comes to safety, when it comes to money, things of that nature, having to look at things differently, do things differently. And Venus and Uranus is almost like this, can be magical in a way, kind of like something comes out of nowhere, out of the air, some ideas like, whoa, this is a way that I can earn money, for example, or I didn't think about, or maybe we earn money in a higher degree off of something we're already doing that we didn't expect. So something can come in. It's just kind of like a reminder of what we've worked through since 2018. And this won't be the last Venus-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. Actually, next April 2026, because Uranus will back into Taurus here for one last time before it moves into Gemini for good next spring. And before it does, Venus will make another visit at 29 degrees with Uranus and Taurus. So this is, one of the last two Venus-Uranus conjunctions, and they're both going to be at about 29 degrees or so in Taurus. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It'll be happening right around that time of that void of course moon where we're introspecting. So it could be during those times of introspection about last week's new moon where epiphany moments come in. Epiphanies, especially with regards to our resources, okay, our self-worth, all right? Then the last thing this week will be Neptune turning retrograde on Friday. That's Friday the 5th. So Neptune turns retrograde every year for almost half the year. It's not a big deal, but it is our first Neptune retrograde in Aries in our lifetimes. And this Neptune, entered Aries here in the spring, and it's going to back into Pisces here eventually this fall for a few months before it then moves back into Aries in early 2026, joins Saturn at 0 degrees Aries like we've been talking about, and then from there it's going to be in Aries for a long time, okay? But what we've learned a little bit in the last few months is, again, almost going back to that same theme of expansion, like where is our whole self in this life? Aries kind of represents, the down-to-earth in our bodies kind of experience in this life. Neptune is like our ethereal soul level being, and it's how are we integrating that soul level being into this life. So we've got some glimpses of that here, and now it's going to retrograde. So now it's like, okay, we've got our preview. We know that's coming in 2026, but now what do we have to finish up? Because that's going to be Neptune back into Pisces, the late degrees of Pisces. Pisces is all about finishing things up. So what do we got to finish up on a soul level before we can be ready to really live here as ourselves? And so we're going to have this Mercury retrograde in Leo as part of this review process about who we are as an individual, expressing as a unique person, what do we have to offer the greater world? And again, being faced with challenging those barriers that have been put up against that, whether from us or toward us, okay? So we'll leave it there. If you have any questions, do ask down below. Do follow me on Facebook as well for more regular updates. Check out my YouTube channel, Christopher Taylor Sovereign Harmony. I do monthly updates. I put these Instagram lives on there as well every week. And I also have my webinars on there. My most recent webinar is that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. Do check that out. That is on there, really good information. Other than that, if you're interested in a personal reading, I'm doing a deal this summer. You can check that out. Again, I post on Facebook, so that'll be in the comments section of any posts I do on Facebook. You can see about that. Contact me for that as well. Otherwise, we'll see you next week in July, believe it or not, and take care. Enjoy your weekend.